welcome to episode 12 of At Home with Cathy. We are back in the master bedroom where we began our first episode with this in this room. We started a wax resist finish and we had Janet from Old Flame Furnishings here to help. So we've painted the bed. I have to say it was quite a process to paint this bed. The wax resist finish is very interesting. You paint a coat, you wax with what I used were broken up candles, old candles. You paint over it, sand off, and using a variety of sandpapers. Where you've waxed, the paint comes off very quickly. So then we did it again. We actually ended up doing 4 layers here. We started with Napoleonic blue. We did a mix of Napoleonic and Aubusson blue. We did a mix of Aubusson and Louis blue. And the last coat was Louis blue and old ochre. And those were 1-to-1 mixes all along. So as you can see from the headboard, which I have finished, you end up with this beautiful worn finish, as though we've had layers of paint and the years have scraped them away. It's not completely even, it's not completely perfect, but that's kind of the point. This bed is a reproduction 4-poster bed with the pineapple finials on it, and the paint would stick on it differently depending on how you used it, especially if you were back using old paints in the old days. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how we get to the finish using sandpaper. And my cat is distracting us by trying to get into a closet. I swear. So this is the image we sort of started with. And we used the candle, we would just rub it along. So now we've finished all of that. We've done all our painting. So now we're going to go to the sandpaper. I've used a variety of sandpapers. This one's very coarse. It's really rough. I can't remember how rough it was, but it was about a 60 or a 100. Oops. Very rough. You do want all kinds of odd little pieces. As it broke apart, that actually worked well, because you can see we've got curves, we've got like a spindle sort of look here where it's been turned. We have indentations. Like, it's just going to take a little bit of work, so we're going to show that. This one is a much finer. This is about a 220 grit. I don't necessarily want to sand this down so it's uniform. I like that sort of random look. That's how it would have worn naturally. We are also going to use the sanding pads that are part of the Annie Sloan series. I really like them. They have a flexible finish on the back, like a foam, stretchy foam, and they work really well as we work on the rounded parts. So let's start with the pineapple and work our way down. You can see that if I start with too rough a paper, I'm going to go right down to the wood. I don't want that. That's not the look I want for right here. Might want a little bit of that. These papers have written on the back of them fine, coarse, medium. So I'm going to start with the coarse, and I'm just going to hold it, and I'm gently going to sort of flux it around. You can see that I'm taking off that top layer, but I'm actually got about 3 different color layers here, because it's not all coming off, only where I had wax on it. Now, if I really put some pressure on it, I'd get it all the way down to the bare wood again, or the finished wood of what we started. I don't want that. But I also don't want big gobs of solid paint. Right here you can see that this is a combination of the Louis blue and the old ochre, and it's painted quite solidly there. I don't want that. I want to wear it just a little bit. I love these sanding papers because they take it down. So now you can see I've got a layer. And the nice thing is I don't have to have this perfect. I don't have to sand with the grain. I can sand up and down to create some marks of interest. I go all the way around here. So it'll take a little time. This was, again, this particular finish has probably been the most time-demanding finish, but the results are quite beautiful. No two projects you did would ever be the same, because you wouldn't take the furniture wouldn't take the paint the same way, you wouldn't apply it the same way. It makes quite a difference if you apply it in the daytime or using artificial light at night, I found. It probably took me, I'm going to say, three hours or so, maybe an hour, 45 minutes to paint each finish and the wax part. So I've probably got about 4 hours into this bed right now, and then another half an hour of sanding on the headboard. When I come down here, deliberately, we had the Napoleonic blue on the inside, and we sort of left that. We painted lightly over the top because we wanted some of that finish, the dark finish, to be there. It's more dramatic, just as it is in the grooves on the pineapple. Come all the way down here. I am going to create quite a bit of dust, so if you find you're sensitive to dust, wear a mask when you do this and have a vacuum handy. So I really liked using the sponge pads, sanding pads, on all of these turned bits of wood, but I didn't find they had the same grit that I needed when it came to actually doing the flat surfaces. I couldn't get as much scratching as I kind of wanted, so I started alternating. I'd use my heavy sandpaper, and I'd create some scratches. And again, this is random. This is where it makes sense to you. A bed would have maybe had a trunk or something that was sitting here and it would rest against it. I did a little bit of wear on the edges, because again, that's where it naturally would wear. I love this because you can just fold them over, get in here, create a little bit of imprint by sanding down the different layers of paint. This bed has lots of detail on it. For doing the end pieces, I thought I could just take a piece. It also depends on the pressure you use. I'm just letting the paper rest on that and go up and down. And then I take my medium and wear some of those just a little bit more. So when you've got it how you like it, I'd recommend that you take a damp cloth and you wipe off all the dust. You don't want that dust in there when you start to wax. The other thing that a damp cloth does, it'll show you what it'll look like when it actually is waxed. Because when you wax, even with the clear wax, you're going to go back, you're going to deepen the color just a little bit. So just take your damp cloth, go all the way around. And honestly, every time I finish a piece, I had to stand back and look at it and say, was that what I was going for? So I would say this is. I like the way this looks. We're going to just do a little bit of waxing on this. Then I'll go around and finish waxing the bed, and the next time you see it, it'll all be made with a duvet and pillows and the whole thing. You'll just want to jump right in it. So we're going to wax this right now. So I'm going to use clear wax, because again, I don't want to add any more color, and my small wax brush. And you can see as soon as I start putting wax on here, the color darkens. And work that wax all the way in. All those little rounds. A turned bed has so much detail on it. A turned anything. And I'm just gonna work all my wax in here. And whenever you start a waxing project, make sure you have a nice pile of waxing cloths handy, because you're going to go through quite a bit. as you work that. So I've got my pile right here on the floor. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to take off my excess wax. I'm just going to rub this all around. If you're wondering if you have enough wax on, just take your nail, rub it along. You should have very little buildup on the end of your nail. You're better to do 2 thin coats of wax because all you're going to do is waste wax. And I like using long skinny cloths when I'm doing this because I just put my foot here and I can buff them. So I'm removing the wax, but because I was so light on this wax, I'm already starting to get a shine. I don't know if you can catch that shine or not. Right there. So I'll go back, take that, I'll get a clean cloth. I tend to work with 3. 1 to wipe the wax off, 1 to do the first sort of buffing, and then the last one is for polishing. And gradually I move the cloths up. When the one that I've used to wipe the wax off is fully saturated, and you can tell, the cloth starts to feel really sticky and heavy, and instead of wiping wax, all you're doing is smearing it. It's more noticeable on something that's a solid look than it is on something with this much variation in the paint. That one is garbage or makes a great fire starter, but you can't use it anymore. Move up. The one that you were using for your first buff becomes your wiping off cloth, and so on. That way you're kind of utilizing the best of your rags. So I've got a nice shine on here now. So we'll just do a little bit right here so you can see how it changes the color. You can actually see, that's what I like about a brush. I can actually see where my wax is. I'm going to work it in. Just do this section right here. Again, if you're not sure, just run your fingernail. I don't have any residue, hardly at all, on my fingernail. Take my first cloth, wipe off the excess wax. You can actually feel when you're wiping wax off, it sort of has a resistance when you start, like it's stuck to your cloth, and then all of a sudden it starts to smooth. Take my buffing cloth, and buffing isn't about going hard on the wax. You don't need to use every ounce of energy you have and all your muscle power. With this finish, I don't want it to be super shiny. I just want it to be smooth and finished. I'll probably do a second coat just to protect it, but that is a beautiful finish, and I've got great interest here. I'll continue that all along the bed. I'll stand back and look at it, might add a little bit more down there, but that is exactly the finish that I was hoping to get from this bed. Beautiful finish, the wax resist. A little bit of work, a little bit of time, but well worth it on this beautiful piece of furniture. So now let's have a look at the end tables. I just call these end tables, but they're actually bedside tables that used to be end tables, probably used in the living room. They just seem to lend themselves to this French bedroom. I love the curving legs, I like the little bits of detail, but this is how it started. It's plywood. It's nothing very special. It has an interesting look, but it's not a particularly valuable piece. It just is useful. It has a shelf, it has a nice lip on it, which if you own a cat is great because they can't biff things off the top quite as easily. So I've painted all of this with a thick coat of old white. It has its first coat on it. It's going to end up looking like this. A chipped and worn patina, as though it's been in the family for tons of years, and we've all used it very well. It was kind of interesting. What Annie recommends to thicken your paint is either leave the top off the can overnight. In my house, I don't trust anybody four-legged, so I would not do that. Or put it in the fridge for at least 2 hours. That worked perfectly. I got nice, thick paint. So I did my first coat, and I've let it dry. I've done my second coat here, and I'm creating a texture. I am actually going to dry it faster than it would normally dry, and in so doing, I'm going to use a hairdryer. It's going to be a little noisy. I won't talk while I'm doing that, but you're going to see how we get a crackled finish just using a hairdryer. So I paint, the paint goes on thickly. I want a good solid coat. And while it's drying, I might even add a bit more. So I've got a good thick coat. It's really thickened up now. And the thick coat's important because I want the top to dry faster than the bottom. And by doing it that way, I'm going to get that crackled finish. So here goes. Now the beauty of this is, if I didn't think I had enough crackles, I can stop using my hairdryer as soon as the sheen is off because I'm pretty much done with the effect I'm going to get. If I didn't think I had enough crackling, or I didn't like the way it had turned out, I could put another layer of paint on and do it again. And that's what I'll continue to do as I work my way around here. I could use a step 1 and step 2 crackler that Annie Sloan actually makes, which is great if I'm working on something that I want a very fine patina of crackle on it, like as though the varnish had all kind of crackled at the same time because it got cold or something like that. This is caused from age, from the wood maybe absorbing moisture, swelling, and then contracting and crackling. I want to maybe define that a little bit more. So I could wax it, and the wax would go into all of the little cracks and crevices all the way along. But I might not want to do it with a dark wax because maybe I don't want it to look quite as old as that. So the finish we're going to use is following the recipe that Annie has in her colored recipes for painted furniture. We're going to use a wash. Just before we do that, we're going to zoom in on a mistake. In here, if you can see that, it's very rough. I moved my brush over paint that had almost dried and I roughed up the paint. I don't necessarily want a rough finish. I want a crackled finish, but not a rough finish. So before I went any further in this particular area, I would sand that out and repaint it. I don't want things to get caught on it, like dust or hair, and I want it to end up with the appearance of a roughness, but the feel of a smoothness. So we're just going to turn this around a little bit, and I'm going to show you the wash. I've already crackled this edge, and I'm going to use Country Gray, which is a very soft greeny gray, and I've added quite a lot of water. I think it's probably about 5 or 6 to 1. You have to experiment with this a little bit. I want a little patina of color, but I don't want it super dark. So when you use a wash, because the paint is heavier than the water, it's going to always want to settle to the bottom. That's why I like working with a paper cup or something like this. I can keep stirring it. I'm just going to I'm going to use a small flat brush. I want to control where I'm working. And the other thing I'm going to do is have a cloth ready so that if I don't like what I'm seeing, I can wipe it off or use the cloth to push the wash into the paint. So this is going to be just a dark, but you can see how as soon as I do that, you can see some of the crackling start up. You can just see the lines a little bit more. And because I don't want to have a drip edge like that, I'm just going to take the paint and take off some of it. So now all I've done is you can clearly see the lines. When you look over here, you don't see them as much as you see them now, right here. And I can dab at it a little bit more. You can play with this. You want it to look aged. We're going to continue to work this whole table. Let's just do down here and see how this looks. I was kind of curious to how this part would look. I thought that when I did the wash, all my detail would show up a little more, and it does. Here I'd want to be careful not to have drips. I don't want to have big gobs of my country gray wash going down. So again, work in small sections when you're working with a wash. Don't forget to do inside. On this, there's a little curl. If you work in too large a section, it's going to dry before you can get back and do your dabbing. You want it to be fairly uniform, but you want it to have, it would be natural that in the little crevices, it's a little bit darker. That would be perfectly natural. What I've got inside here is a big drip of paint because it's so watery. It's just forming in the basin that the little hole has. There we go. So now all those lines, all of the little carving that's in this piece are far more defined. So when I do wax it, and I'll be using a clear wax on it, it's all going to pop out and stand out a lot more, all my little lines everywhere. So I have to sand my mistake and then continue to do that. And I should say, when I started this table, I followed one of Annie's hints. I turned it upside down and I painted all the underside first. It really was much faster than when I flipped it up. All I had to do were the sides and the top, and it was really fast to paint. I didn't have to wait for it to dry because by the time I finished by painting from upside down, my legs were up here and I painted down, they were dry. So I could just flip it up and put it upside down. It was so fast to paint. I probably painted this whole table in about, I want to say 10 minutes. It was really quick. I let it dry overnight because I wanted it to be good and dry. And my paint went back in the fridge and stayed overnight. Brought it out and started the second coat, and it does give it a nice thickness. So when you come back, we will have finished this little piece. We're going to take a little bit of burgundy, and we're just going to take a little pencil, an artist brush, sorry, and we're just going to do a little detail here in burgundy to pick out a little bit of the pink that's in the room. So the last thing we're going to do in this room is a color mix for this dressing table. So this old dressing table has definitely had a lot of wear. It's been moved all around Canada. It comes apart if you move it and you're not being careful. If you lift the top off, it wants to fall apart. It's been in basements and attics and bedrooms, and it's time for it to be either refinished or painted. The room has its inspiration from the beautiful carpet we showed you in the first episode for this bedroom, but I couldn't find the red in any of the paints that actually matched it. The burgundy's too burgundy, the primer red's too brown, and the Emperor's Silk is too red. So I went to Annie's color mixing pages, again, colored recipes, and she talks about making reds darker. The Emperor's Silk Red is the right red, but it's too intense, it's too bright. So I'm going to mix it with olive, and we're going to come out with a red that is more intense, more cranberry, without going to the burgundy. Because this is a piece that we're going to paint the whole base this color, I need to actually measure it. If I don't measure it, I might not be able to duplicate it. And I'll just show you, I played with the color. You might remember we did some color mixing. I played with the color until I came out with what I was looking for. So I know that it's about twice as much red as olive green. So let's do that by measuring. You want to give your red a good stir. You can tell from the can lid that there is a variety of color here. That's because the colors that are in it will separate. So if they've separated on the lid, they've separated in the can. Give it a good stir. Take my stick out here, put it in my bowl. And I use 1/4 cup measuring cup just because I find that's the easiest measure. for me to work with right here. When I'm doing bigger projects, I'd use the bigger one, and I have my spatula handy because I do find that's, you want to get as much of that paint out, you don't want to waste it. And I'll clean that out. Clean off my can. And I've got my olive in a squeeze bottle, and I'm going to measure this out by tablespoon. It's going to be about 2 tablespoons of the olive to get to this. We'll give it a good stir before we add the second one, just to see. I find the color mixing is kind of exciting. You're never really sure what you're going to end up with until you start to paint and see how it dries, because don't forget, wet paint never looks exactly the same. So you can see it's starting to darken. I'm losing the cherry red, and I'm going into a richer. But it's going to take more. I can do it a little faster by taking the top off. So let's do another tablespoon. And what I do is I have a notebook, and I just write all these recipes down, because I might need to duplicate it, or I want to make it, maybe I find another piece for this room and I wanted to have that same paint. Once you get your color, make note and write it down. So let's see this. So we've gone from this red. You can see it changing to a deeper red. And you want to make sure you get that well mixed, because otherwise you're going to end up with paint that has little streaks in it. So now I've gone to a duller red that will dry darker. It's not burgundy. It's not primer red because it doesn't have as much brown in it. It's the green. And it was the olive green that gave me that depth. If I'd played with Amsterdam green or Antibes, I would have had a brighter color. But I want a rich, dark color. Nice. So my table, my dressing table, I guess, is all primed. All cleaned, I'm sorry, and ready to go. So let's just put a coat on here. And I am going to follow the wood grain here. It almost has a blue tone in the bowl, but when I bring it onto the wood, you can see the red all the way down. I love these round bristle brushes because they just carry so much paint, but you can wiggle them into little nicks and dents and cuts and get rid of work the paint right in, right off the bat. I'm probably going to have to do 2 coats just because this furniture is so dark, even with the dark richness of the red. Nice smooth coat. And that is definitely going to be the red that we were looking for. And I hope you don't have as many cat hairs as I do to pull out a thing. So we'll let that dry, come back and have a look at it. And when you come back, when we do the wrap up of this series, this will be all painted and you will see how that red Emperor Silk and olive mix turned out. We look forward to you joining us on our next episode when we go back to the spare room, the boho room, and play with the chair and hopefully have the dresser. Have a great week. like to learn more about the paint techniques and color mixing that we've done using our Annie Sloan paint at our At Home with Cathy series, join us at one of our hands-on live workshops at the store. Absolutely fabulous at home. Just find us on our website and sign up for a class.